And he would show people all this information about UFOs, but then what he would do is, hey, have you ever seen a UFO yourself? Yeah. So he would get the reports, and he would document that stuff. But it was a great way of promoting that things, and he did something that was just like out of the box. Well, actually, I had two or three friends submit reports back in the 80s that I was able to pull the data up on when they told me about it, because he kept that information all those years, and I was able to access it. But if you think about it, I mean, it's constantly promoting the subject of UFOs and putting, a positive light on it, that it's not, crazy. People are seeing things that we can't explain. And there are people out there doing serious research to see if they can, number one, find an answer for what the person saw. But if not, and it goes in that category of unknown, we're categorizing and cataloging that data that went along with it to maybe use for reference for the future. So we've had a long history here in this state that's been going on, like since the 1950s. I don't know how many groups there have been in Ohio off the top of my head, but a number of groups over the years. And when you get people like for 60 years, 70 years promoting the subject, it builds that interest. I've gone out to a couple local libraries in the country that you think, okay, here we're out in the sticks. This is farm country. And I had 60 people show up for a talk because they're interested in the subject. And some of these people remembered these old research groups. And that interest has just been ongoing all these years. Now, if other states, and this is one of the things that MUFON does, is MUFON wants their state directors and other individuals involved with MUFON to get out and talk about the subject and promote it and build that interest. And I think if some of these other states that had maybe lower numbers, if they were doing that, I'm not saying they're not doing it, but if they went out and kept promoting year after year after year, that interest may go up. And that beep you heard in the background was just a UFO report that came in.
There you go. All right.
I thought your cup of soup was ready in the microwave.
I do have the microwave in the office here, but my phone beeps when I get reports in.
Really?
Cool.
All right.
But this brings up another really interesting point, and that is, aside from the white vans parked outside the doors constantly, etc., what is the security, and how concerned are you for safety, just because of the topic that you're covering?
I see more people who turn reports in that are paranoid. And the bad part, Barbara, is you'll see somebody turn a report in that says, I don't want to give any information on where I'm at, but I saw this object was like a star. And it couldn't have been an airplane. It had to be a UFO, and it was a star-like object. And they're afraid that somebody's going to come at their door and knocking at the door. Well, I'm not going to say it can't happen, but it's highly doubtful. Some of the areas I've been exposed into, though, are a lot more extreme, where I've had to go out and interview witnesses that were potential autopsy witnesses at Wright-Patterson.
Really?
Yeah.
And you had to go there and interview people who said that they had seen an alien body?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't know if I'd ever told you about this story or not, Henry.
No, I haven't heard this one.
Okay. So we can tell you about the story. Well, this is what it was right before I became state director. And this was kind of comical. I love this part. I was the chief field investigator at that time for Ohio, and our state director gets a call from our international director that says they want to borrow me for a certain assignment. And she goes, well, what's the assignment? And he goes, I'm not going to tell you. You don't have any need to know. And she goes, yeah, but he's, basically works for me. And they go, we want him for an assignment. We're not going to tell you anything about it. And they didn't. So she gave the approval. I got the call. And they said, what we did is we received a call at our headquarters from an individual who said he walked in on an autopsy at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the 1980s. So they passed his information on to me. I was able to contact the witness. And now this is the type of individual I understand his hesitancy about, coming out and talking about, because he's been afraid. I mean, it happened in the 1980s. He's been afraid now for 30 years that this black Ford Galaxy is going to be sitting outside looking at his house. And, I understand that. I mean, think about this. If you worked at the Air Force Base and he was like a medical assistant at the base, and he just did normal duties down there where related back to medical assisting. On one day, he had to go into an area they called the morgue. And he had to go into the morgue area, and what was kept in there was medical supplies. And he says, that's just where we kept them at. He says, I'd been in there hundreds of times. He says, inside the morgue, of course, you always had these vaults, like you see in the movies, that the drawers pull out with the bodies and stuff in them. And he says they had these vaults in there, which was normal. But he says, one, when he looked at it, what struck him strange the first time he saw it was, it appeared that there was this lock that had been welded on haphazardly, that it wasn't designed that way. It was like somebody had put a lock on this thing. And he goes, he'd been in there this whole time on duty, and he says that vault had never been unlocked, never been opened. So on this one given day, he goes walking into the morgue. And he goes, the first thing he sees is the lock is off and the drawers pull out. Goes, okay. So he just proceeds in like normal. And he goes to get his medical supplies, and he hears a noise in the autopsy room and turns around and sees a number of individuals gathered around a table, an autopsy table. And he says he recognizes one as being a colonel. He doesn't know who it was, but he says it was definitely a colonel. And he says the first thing that happens is this colonel starts screaming at him. What the heck are you doing in here? Who are you? And the guy came out and he goes, oh, I'm just trying to get medical supplies here. And he says he looks into the room and he says the body that's on the table is not human. He said the body on the table was a gray alien. He says it was without a doubt not human. He says the colonel screaming at me, you've got no business here, la, 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 la. And he said, I'm just getting the medical supplies. And he says, I just got the heck out of the room. Now, he's expecting to get really dressed down later on. But it appears they just let it drop. And probably just observed him to make sure he didn't talk about it. Or, like, especially probably through other people at the hospital, at the facility. Did he talk to other people? Did he ever bring the subject up? And he says, I was too scared. He says, in my opinion, I could have ended up at some base in the Arctic, for all I know.
Or in the next drawer over.
Exactly. There could have been a padlock on the next one to it. And that's where he could have been. And he goes, I never told my wife for 30-some years. And he says, until recently, he says, I'm in my 60s. My health isn't good. And he says, I just feel like I got to get it off my chest. And he says, because I've been holding this in all these years. Now, he wasn't looking for any gain, because that's one of the things I was looking at. I said, okay, is this guy going to say, I'll tell you what, I'll go public with my story if you give me some money. He never said that. He just said, I just want to tell my story, and that's it. But we didn't even meet at his house. We met actually in a restaurant when we met, and I was able to record the whole conversation. And he seemed like he was being very forward, being very honest with everything. Now, there was some things I pulled out, pictures, diagrams of the base from what I could obtain of that same time frame. And either he, was unsure about some of the areas where they're at. Maybe his memory was fading. But I wouldn't come out and say beyond a shadow of a doubt, that everything that he answered everything the way I was expecting him to answer it. Let's just say that some things seemed like he was a little bit hesitant on. But the answer he gave me, at least he believed were true. Now, as his memory may have faded, on some things, because if you think about it, it's been 30 some years. Also, the pictures I had maybe weren't exactly the way the base looked at that time in certain areas, like where certain buildings were at. So that may have changed some too. But, I mean, he's appeared to be very honest. Now, that was the type of case where not just the witness, but myself personally, I was a little bit concerned that it wasn't just me. There was only 3 people in all of MUFON that knew what I was doing. That was an international director and the head of our media department, who I knew very well at that time, Roger Marsh. I haven't had contact with Roger for a while, but he reached out to me, and he was the one who set a lot of stuff up. And I was organizing things through him. And when I went to leave, maybe I was just being overly paranoid, but I don't think so. There was a car that appeared to be following me quite a way home, because I had to drive about 150 to 200 miles to do the interview. And it was one of those that you get a little bit paranoid thinking somebody's following you. And what you do is you get off the interstate and you go around a bunch of side roads. And the next thing you know, you look around and this car is following you all these down these side roads. And then when you get back on the interstate, he's following you back on the interstate. So now, nothing happened. I'm still here with you.
Are you sure? How do we know?
Well, I've been on your show a number of times, so I checked your website. So that's one thing that says so. But, in my own point of view, that's these are situations which are much more touchy on there. When you get something that's much deeper in content, let's just say. That, okay, here's a witness talking about this. And, okay, there's going to be people out there saying, he probably maybe saw things incorrectly, maybe he's making it up. But what I look for also on there, Henry, too, is correlating information. That maybe there's other people that saw the same thing. And eventually maybe they'll come out. And if this story doesn't go public, and all of a sudden you get somebody coming in and talking about the same situation that didn't have any knowledge of the other one. Now you've got something, I don't know if we want to say concrete, but much more concrete. And that happened in a way, Henry, with the Cleveland group I was with. You always hear these stories, and you always wonder about some of these stories, how good, how honest people are being, or is things being made up, is things being distorted. Well, at one time there was a doctor that was a member of the group, and the doctor, they were telling me, was one of his things that he was involved with basically was autopsies. And that was his specialty. Well, when I looked at his specialty, it also goes back to chemistry, body chemistry.